All right, again, we have your questions in this bowl. There's more than I'll be able to get to. And I'll just say at the outset that I know that sometimes there's a question underneath your question, and I'm not a mind reader. So if I pull your question, or even if I don't, and I don't really answer your question, feel free to email me, we can get coffee and talk about it more directly. I'm always aiming for that. And I'll just, one more caveat before we go into this, I should have said this last week, is I'm not the answer guy. Part of our invitation as people of faith is to all together wrestle with how would we respond to these questions. So again, more than what I have to say today, I hope this will be in some ways a little bit of a dialogue, even if yours is internally with yourself and what I'm saying. But I invite that engagement. I invite the question, the follow-up question, at least mentally, to wrestle with it. And if that leads you to a place where you want to hit me up for coffee and take the conversation a bit further, I always welcome that. Part of my role in here as your pastor is to be able to be on these spiritual journeys, wrestling with life's big questions and what it means for us. So with that, we've got people on a timer in the back, and we've got a slightly less annoying dinner this week. So hopefully they'll do a better job of keeping me on track. I need your help. So we've got about 20 minutes. So I'll get through as many of your questions as we can. All right? Thank you for keeping it up. Your time. All right. The authenticity of the Gospels. How do we know? What is the evidence that they're accurate? We know that Jesus existed as a person, but can we trust these accounts of his life? I'm going to start with a non-answer, which is, some of you joined us last fall, winter for Intro to the Bible. We're going to continue that this fall with Intro to the Old Testament. Part of the invitation is, it's a nuanced, well, it depends what you mean by accurate. It depends what you're looking for by truth. I believe that the Gospels are a beautiful invitation to wrestle with truth. Some of the perennial questions, I love the ways that they point to Jesus, but they are also storytellers. And in one sense, how they tell the stories, there's both alignment oftentimes, but there are also big differences. And if you wanted to get down to, well, they disagree on this fact, yes, there are contradictions of facts in the Gospels between them. But again, it comes down to how are we reading them and what are we looking for? Does that mean that there's no truth or deeper meaning in them? So part of the invitation for this 6-week class that we're going to start, and then after that we'll get to the New Testament, is to wrestle with how are we supposed to read Scripture and understand? What do we make? What sense do we make of the fact that they do sometimes contradict each other in terms of certain facts, details, but they also have deep coherence around other elements, aspects of them. And I'll just say this, if all 4 Gospels, which were written at different times by different people, if they all look exactly the same, it should in some ways raise suspicions. This is one of the things that scholars talk about. If you hear a story and it is verbatim, word for word, exactly the same as someone else, you get suspicious, right? Okay, did you come up with that? Or are you just copying? The Gospels themselves are meant to show different pictures of Jesus, to tell the story in different ways. There are stories told in the Gospel of Matthew that are not in the Gospel of John or Luke or Mark, and vice versa with all of them. So part of what I think speaks to a certain degree of authenticity, what I love about them, is that they don't always agree with each other. They paint different pictures of this Jesus. They lift up different stories. Or sometimes they tell the same story, but in different ways. That doesn't mean that the thing never happened. It maybe invites us to think about what meaning, what truth we're taking out of it a little bit differently. So I'll just plug the class that has not been yet announced, but will be announced in the weeks to come, and invite you to join us and deepen your own engagement with the Scriptures, because I think, maybe I'm a little biased, being a pastor and all, having studied them in their original languages and such, I think they are a rich resource for our wrestling with what it means to be human and alive, to live life on purpose, even here and now, this drastically different context that we live in. So I hope that gets at some of what you're looking for, whoever you are. We got a big one here. All right. Many of us have lived through troublesome times before. These times are eerily familiar. We are called to action, but in all times of crisis, the optimum path forward is unclear. More than responding as individuals, a concerted effort is called for. So, how can or should we use Common Table to that end? I'm just going to read, there's a number of questions. I'm going to read them all, and then I'll try to respond to them. How can or should we use Common Table to that end? Is that the best place? What else exists? Where is the coordinating effort for groups like ours? Is it in the ministerial association or social service associations? Now that school is starting, what can we do to protect dreamers? How can we encourage them? Have we been faithful stewards of our facilities in the face of the present need? How can we do better? Think of our history with the Underground Railroad. What does our status as a church allow us to do differently than an individual or a business? Can we hide people? Can we hold classes for ICE targets without fear of a raid? Can we provide meeting space for other agencies or businesses that need the cover of the Lord to operate? I don't know how well I'll get to all of these, but I want to give you a sense of where we're at with this conversation. Last winter, spring, of course, as this current administration came into power, one of the first things they did was begin to send ICE into major cities and round up people. There have been ICE quotas. They're going into places like Home Depot and 7-Eleven. And we hear all these sort of horror stories of, we were told people who are committing crimes are going to be the ones targeted. Well, now we know that's not true. And we even have people who are citizens, who have green cards, etc., are being rounded up as part of this collateral damage and being sent away. So in the midst of that, we started to say, how do we respond? What does our faith call us to? The leadership board started asking that question. I was asking that question. I was having those conversations with other leaders in the community. And we eventually got to the point of asking the congregation to participate in a conversation around that so that we as a congregation could own whatever response we were having. It's not just Pastor Eric doing it. It's not just the leadership board saying, here's what we're doing, but we as a congregation wanted to respond. Knowing that individuals might be in different places, but we wanted to have a collective, concerted effort. Common Table was sort of born in the midst of that out of a grant. And part of it was, we want to respond, but we are still so segregated. We don't know each other well enough to be able to respond. Right now, there's a deep culture of fear and distrust. And so if you don't already have a relationship with communities as a church or amongst the leaders, it's really hard to now respond because we can't just open our doors and say, here, come here. Well, we don't know who you are. Can we trust you? There are masked agents in unmarked vehicles pulling up. We don't know who we can trust. We're going to stay in our houses. We're going to stay home. We're not going to go to work. In that climate, relationship and the capital of trust, the currency of trust, is crucial. You can't do anything without it. So part of what Common Table was an effort to get started was, hey, how about we get out of our segregation and start eating together and start sharing stories where we can build trust. So that initiative continued throughout the summer. I don't know, I was gone, so I don't know how many of you participated in those other conversations. We hosted one, but there were a series of other conversations, nine in total, I think, throughout the county. Part of my hope is that we as a leadership board and as a congregation will continue to move in this direction and say, if we're serious about this, where and with whom can we deepen a relationship and trust? What does that look like? What kinds of, does Common Table provide a model outside of its specific grant, parameters, can we take that model and continue to gather and talk with maybe a specific community to deepen that trust? Because otherwise we can't respond. One of the things that I know from social service agencies, as I've talked to some of their directors and folks, is that they have these great resources. They're doing this incredible grant-funded work, giving stuff away for free, and they're going and showing up right in the heart of where they want to give it to, and no one is coming. Why is no one coming? Because they don't know you. You're not part of the community. They don't trust you. And so they're having to reframe and say, where are the anchor institutions in the community I'm going to? Where does the trust exist? That's part of what we're working to develop right now, is that relationship. Because we have not, as a church, as many churches have not, as Dr. King said 60 years ago, Sunday mornings are the most segregated hour in America. That has continued to be true. We're trying to change that, but it still is largely true. So we're trying to create these partnerships to help us get beyond that. So when a need arises, we can be ready to respond. So as one example that I think brings a few threads together. In March or so, there is this rapid response teams that were forming across the country as people were deeply afraid and they're trying to figure out, is that ICE? And people were reporting all over Facebook, ICE is here, and everybody was getting anxious and afraid and not knowing what to do. We realized we need these groups to go around verifying, is that actually ICE? Let's stop posting it everywhere. Trying to collect the data so that we can have a core group that is saying, actually, no, that's not. Or yes, it is. ICE is in town. Stay inside, be safe, protect yourselves. Thank you. I'm going to wrap this up with this. One was forming here in DeKalb, and I'll share some of these details. Some of these I'm not going to share publicly because of the sensitive nature of it. But know that more is happening than we've necessarily, everyone has seen on the surface. As the rapid response team locally has formed, as a local community leader who has connections there and has gotten to know them, then when an issue does happen, like we had an incident earlier this spring where someone who was undocumented was being targeted by ICE, but they didn't know it, they're unhoused. So it's a cold Saturday in March. We find out that ICE is in town looking for her. They've been to the public libraries, Sycamore Public Library, asking for her. Where does a person who doesn't have a house, where do they go on a cold Saturday? Right? They're looking for a public space, and so that's where ICE is going. Because of my connections and contact, I'm able to say, we'll figure out what to do. But if you find this person, let me know, and we have a space, our doors are locked. I know the Know Your Rights protocol. I know what to say or what not to say, what to do or what not to do. Because I know some of that training, I'm able to respond and in that moment say, we can provide you a safe space. And at the same time, unfortunately, as a church, we don't have a protected status anymore. That was part of what changed under the Trump administration. Previously, churches and schools were declared sanctuary sites. It wasn't a legal term, but it was technically honored. ICE wasn't just going to come into your building and take someone away. Now they've foregone that, and they go into schools, they go into hospitals, they go into churches. They have arrested people out of queues, out of parking lots. Part of it is you can do so much to try and keep them out, but at the end of the day, we don't have the ability or the authority to do that in this current administration. That's part of the challenge of figuring out our response. So we're looking at what we can do, action-wise, and we're trying to build the partnerships, the relationships, so that when these kinds of moments happen, we are ready to respond. So we'll continue those conversations as leadership and as a community, as a church going forward to figure out how we can continue to live into this better. We've identified that. Thank you. Now, seriously, wrap it up. All right, that's enough for this morning. I know there were a lot of questions around that, though, so I hope that offered some clarification that a number of you were looking for. How do we teach and live our values and ethics, the teachings of Jesus, in a world where national leadership is anything but? The first thing I would say is yes, we are living through a particular kind of moment. And the gospel is not partisan. And before President Trump and his administration came in, Biden and Obama had both also. Obama had become known in the immigrant community as the deporter in chief. So this is not a new issue. Lesser degrees, maybe somewhat categorically distinct in certain ways, but it was not, Democrats were not presenting a vision that was altogether different. It was a lesser degree, an importantly lesser degree of what we have now, but they have not presented an alternative. And so what I would say is that as a church, we are called to be an alternative community, to show and model a different way of being. In a world where people look out for themselves, are trying to get their own, advance their own careers and own lives, we are a community that says, are we willing to take risks for our neighbor that are inconvenient, that might cost me something? Am I willing to risk in a different way? When I've been wounded in the past, am I willing to risk in this community learning to trust again? To change my patterns of running away or staying connected into toxic relationships? When someone here wrongs me or says something, can we build a different way of responding to each other? If we're just going to take the toxicity that exists out in our world and now sanctify it with the gospel here in church, I'm not interested. None of us should be interested. If we're trying to do something different that can bring healing, that can model a different way forward, that is, I think, what the real invitation is, regardless of who the national leadership is. Right now, we're in a particularly difficult moment in history in America with what it looks like and what living our faith might cost us. Right now, there's potentially a higher cost to living our faith boldly and publicly. That's true. But it's not that we haven't been here before in the history of this country, even in these last decades. So the invitation remains the invitation always, if we have hearts to perceive it, instead of just becoming comfortable in our privilege and in our silence. Let's see if I can do one more. I've got 3 minutes. We're going to give me 3 minutes on this. Set the timer. How do we participate in how do we do a participatory, open, results-oriented conversation that is more than just talk about the best way that we can use or not use our building and land in the near term and further down the road, supporting our church's mission, the DeKalb Sycamore community, and beyond? Well, this is the question. This is where we are right now. And again, I'm not the answer person. My goal here as a pastor is to sort of act as, rather than this sort of shepherd image who says, come along, dumb sheep, follow me, I'm going to lead you to pasture, all you have to do is eat and walk and not get lost. I don't really take that as my image for what I'm doing, where it's all hyper-focused on me, and either I'm good or bad. I'm a good shepherd or I'm a bad shepherd. I see my role more as the image that has spoken to me out of Scripture is the image of midwife, of midwifery. The labor is ours, is yours. My role here is to come alongside you, to help keep us oriented toward the larger vision, not to give you the vision, but to help ask the questions and provide the resources as we labor to bring about the new world that we believe God dreams of. It's not mine to do all the things. In some churches, for instance, this is getting off topic a tiny bit, but I'll bring it back. In some churches, for instance, spiritual care, 90% of spiritual care is provided by the congregation, not the pastor. even with a full-time pastor. Other people might get up for a season through some training and some of their own self-reflection, offer sermons, not just the pastor. So part of what I hope we can continue to create is an image where what we are doing together, what I'm helping us to do is to find where we want to each participate, in what ways. In building this community, part of the I think, radical nature of a small local church, not trying to become a mega church, but the power of our small nature is that it can be open and participatory, not just led by professionals, that we can each participate and find our way in. And if no one participates, then we don't have a community. And so as we go through this fall, and we invite you to reflect what gifts, what skills, what passions do I have to bring, we really want you to bring that forward so that we can then say, all right, how can the kids among us welcome people into this space, lead worship? When we start here, not as a way of becoming insular, but we start living in our own family, so to speak, what we say we want to live out in the world, we model a different way. And then when people find us, they are experiencing a community that is doing something differently. So part of it is just creating something different here, not just change out in the world, but it's finding a place that is operating differently. That they say, this is something I want and need. This is missing in my life. I want to be a part of this. I don't have to do all the things, but here's what I can do. When people experience that, I think in a world that is hungry for it, that is in some ways desperate for that sense of belonging, when we start at that real nuclear, family, small community level, that then shapes what and how we do out in the world. But each of us has to find our place in it, however big or small that is. There are lots of things we can do with our building, and we're going to continue to talk about and move toward. The leadership board is having those conversations. Find your place. And in doing so, that will help us to do exactly that in the days and months ahead. We'll leave it there. Friends, may it be so. Amen.